Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving straight into one of the most incredibly complex, fast-moving geopolitical puzzles on the planet right now, the deeply entangled relationship between the United States and Iran. We are looking at a situation that is moving at absolute breakneck speed. It's full of contradictory actions, massive internal political divides in both countries, and huge global economic stakes. So if you've been trying to make sense of the dizzying headlines coming out of the Middle East over the last 24 hours, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to use the latest data and reports to map out exactly what is going on. To really wrap our heads around how wild this moment is, we've got to start with this breaking text from President Donald Trump, an American citizen, a woman who had been wrongfully detained in Iran since December 2024, has just been allowed to leave the country. She is safely outside of Iran, in good condition, which is fantastic news, and the U.S. president openly referred to this as a gesture of goodwill from Tehran.
But here's where things get super weird. It's a massive paradox. At the exact same time we're seeing these literal gestures of goodwill and the safe return of an American hostage, we are also seeing round-the-clock airstrikes. On the exact same day this American was released, air raid sirens were blaring in places like Bahrain, and the U.S. military was conducting a really intense, continuous bombing campaign.
So here is how we're going to break this chaotic web down today. 1. Goodwill amidst airstrikes. 2. Escalating the kinetic war. 3. Factions within Tehran. 4. The Washington divide. And 5. Regional and economic fallout.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Goodwill amidst airstrikes, focusing on this breaking hostage release.
To put today's news into context, we kind of need to rewind a bit. The American citizen who was just released was originally detained back in December 2024. But this is not an isolated incident. Just recently, in April, an Iranian proxy group released a female American journalist they had been holding hostage. Intel analysts note that taking Iranian Americans, who often just travel there to visit relatives, as bargaining chips is basically a well-established playbook for the regime.
Which naturally leads us to ask, is this latest release a genuine opening for diplomacy, like a real, actual attempt to cool things down? Analysts suggest that if the U.S. president is using the very specific phrase goodwill, it's highly likely because that exact terminology was quietly communicated through back channels by the Iranians. But when you zoom out and look at everything else happening at the exact same time, the message gets very, very muddy. Which brings us to Section 2, Escalating the Kinetic War, the round-the-clock bombing.
Okay, you see this number, $400 million. The U.S. military campaign has vastly expanded out there. U.S. Navy jets are now launching strikes around the clock, day and night, trying to clear a path through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. has essentially slapped a naval blockade on closed Iranian ports, forcing commercial vessels to turn right around. U.S. officials estimate that this level of total economic strangulation is costing Iran over $400 million every single day. And as you'd expect, Iran isn't just sitting there taking the financial hit. They are violently striking back, and the regional spillover is frankly immense. Just look at this list. Over the last few days, Iran fired dozens of drones and missiles hitting Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. On top of that, they've struck at least 7 commercial ships in the strait, which tragically resulted in up to a dozen crew members being killed, missing, or wounded. So where is this going? Well, this escalation is following a pretty clear trajectory that the U.S. president has openly discussed. Step 1 is where we are right now, coastal strikes. U.S. forces recently hit Greater Tumb Island right outside the strait. Step 2, which the president threatened this week, means moving further inland to hit vital infrastructure, think bridges and power stations. And Step 3, that's the ultimate escalation, targeting nuclear sites, specifically those underground uranium enrichment facilities the U.S. is always monitoring.
Let's shift gears to Section 3 to see who's pulling the strings here. Factions within Tehran, a regime divided.
You see, the Iranian government isn't just one big, unified bloc. It's actually deeply fractured. On one side, you have the moderates, figures like Foreign Minister Arakchi and President Pezeshkian. They're the faces of the negotiations. They're the ones likely orchestrating these goodwill hostage releases. But then on the flip side, you have the hardliners, specifically the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC. They are operating on a completely separate sheet of music, independently ordering drone and missile strikes across the Gulf.
You know, it's really tempting to look at our geopolitical adversaries and assume they are playing some insane 4D master chess match to manipulate us. But intelligence analysts reviewing this situation see the exact opposite.
What we're actually watching is a deeply confused, highly uncoordinated policy arrangement. One faction pushes for diplomacy, while another literally launches missiles, which leads to wildly mixed messaging. Now, let's bring it back home for Section 4, the Washington Divide, hawks versus non-interventionists.
Because it turns out Washington is dealing with a very similar mirror image fracture. We've basically got two totally distinct camps right now. On one side are the hawks, which currently includes the president and his allies. Their strategy leans heavily on military ultimatums, naval blockades, and, as the president recently told reporters, deciding whether to settle the matter or just finish it off. On the other side, you have the non-interventionists, a faction heavily championed by Vice President J.D. Vance. Their strategy is strictly focused on de-escalation, getting back to diplomacy, and ensuring America doesn't start any new foreign wars.
And this isn't exactly a secret, behind closed-doors debate. It's playing out in public. During a recent appearance on a highly popular podcast, Vice President Vance explicitly made this argument, saying, "Diplomacy, not prolonged military action, offers the only lasting solution." He represents a wing of the administration that is deeply, deeply skeptical of perpetual bombing campaigns that don't have a clear exit plan.
And if you track this back chronologically, this internal friction has actually been brewing for months. Back in February, multiple intel agencies were warning that there was no imminent nuclear threat from Iran. When those warnings were sidelined, several non-interventionist officials, like the head of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and Joe Kent, actually resigned. By March, the initial kinetic strikes began, followed by a ceasefire that pretty quickly fell apart. And today, we find ourselves over 100 days into a wildly escalating naval blockade.
And honestly, a lot of this divide comes down to mounting domestic pressure. The non-interventionist wing points out that a 100-plus day war in the Middle East is wildly unpopular with the administration's own base. Polling shows that American voters are way more focused on domestic issues, like the economy, border control, and deportation policies. For a lot of folks, this escalating conflict looks like a massive distraction from the America First agenda they voted for, especially since it threatens to spike prices at home.
All right, final section, number 5, regional and economic fallout. Let's look at the big picture global impact.
At the end of the day, a massive chunk of this boils down to the Strait of Hormuz. Reopening that choke point is absolutely crucial for the global economy, and especially for lowering U.S. gas prices. But as we just discussed, the American public does not want the U.S. Navy playing permanent security guard in the Middle East. So who steps up? We might need an international coalition to take over. Whether it's Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, European allies, or even players like China and Oman, somebody is going to have to secure the strait so global trade can flow without a perpetual American military presence.
Meanwhile, we can't ignore a massive piece of this puzzle: Israel. Right now, Israel is basically on standby. They haven't rejoined the bombing campaign against Iran, though their leadership has warned they are totally prepared to if they're fired upon. Intel analysts note that the U.S. holding Israel back right now is a highly strategic move. It's actually incredibly reminiscent of Desert Storm. By keeping Israel out of the direct kinetic action, the U.S. preserves the super fragile coalition of Arab nations, some of whom might quietly support or even eventually join these strike operations against Iran.
So that leaves us with one huge lingering question regarding this whole dual-track paradox. With back-channel goodwill gestures happening on the exact same day as billion-dollar bombing runs, will diplomacy finally break the blockade, or is kinetic action going to finish it off? It is an incredibly high-stakes race between the diplomats and the generals, both in Washington and in Tehran. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your eyes on the headlines, and I'll see you next time.